Hi everyone, it's Aga from EurekaCrystalBeads.com and I'm here with another beading video for you. Today I'll show you how to make a bead embroidered bracelet that I called Across the Meadow. But before I get started, quick reminder to check out the rest of our channel, and if you like what you see, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you always know when we're posting new content. Today I'm going to show you how to make a bead embroidered bracelet. A really simple pattern with the use of a very simple stitch that I call the grass stitch because it is 3D and it reminds me of grass. That's why I call this bracelet a meadow. The first thing I'm going to do is to draw the outline of the bracelet. For this purpose I'm going to use a pencil and a ruler. You're also going to need to know the circumference of your wrist or the wrist of the person for whom you're making a bracelet. Pro tip, if you don't know the circumference of your wrist, you can use a piece of string and then straighten it up and put it against your ruler, and you're going to know what the length, the circumference is. So basically, we're going to start with a rectangle. So we're going to need to put down a straight line first. My wrist is 16 centimeters and I'm going to subtract 1 centimeter, which is roughly 0.4 inches. Anyway, it's less than half an inch. It's just a bit that you need to subtract so that you can later add the clasp. I'm going to draw the line that is about 15 centimeters. And now we're going to need to finish the rectangle. So I'm gonna need a line that is more or less perpendicular. And now the width of my bracelet is going to be 2 centimeters. Because I find that optimal, it's not too wide. The other side now. As you can see, I'm just using the right angle that I have thanks to the ruler being a rectangle, basically. So I'm just measuring like that. There. This is going to be the bracelet. Now, I like the shape with the slightly rounded edges. So what I do is basically just use whatever is round that I have. I place it roughly in the center. I'm just trying to make my life easier so that I don't have to use compasses or complicated tools like that. Alright, now we have the outline and we can go on with the rest of the bracelet. The next step is making sure that you can't see the white peeking from underneath the beads. So I'm going to color the inside of the bracelet green. Now, as I've said in my video about the basics of bead embroidery, you can also color your foundation with acrylic paints, but remember to water them down a little bit and then to let them dry flat and make sure they're dry before you start beading. Now, let's go on to actually beading around the outline of the bracelet. I'm going to use size 11 beads and a long, I think, size 12 needle. Now what I like to do is not to tie a knot on my thread, but rather to melt it a little bit on the end so that there is a tiny little ball. Now I'm going to embroider along the lines that I drew previously, and to embroider in a straight line You can use some of the stitches that I've shown in my previous video on the basics of bead embroidery. In here I'm going to show you how to do it quite quickly but quite evenly. I'm going to start with 2 beads and sewing them on in the way that you can see on the line. I'm pushing my needle through the foundation, and now I'm adding 2 beads, pushing my needle through the foundation around 2 beads away from the previous 2 beads, and now I'm going to go back, trying to push my needle through on the line between the first and the second bead so that I can go back through the last 3 beads that I've added. And again I add 2 beads, and I go back through 3. Like that. So now I'm going to continue to do this all throughout the outline, and I'm going to come back to you to show you what to do next. Now let me just quickly show you what to do when your thread is about to end and you need to start a new one. You add the 2 beads just like before, and I recommend going through the 3, but now you're not going to add 2 new beads, but instead go back through the base material and tie a knot around this last bit of thread that you added. You make a loop by going under it, you go through that loop, pull it through again through the new loop that you've got. Yes, like this. And then basically this is a knot. What I like to do is to just go through a bit of the beading foundation so that it lays nice and flat, and you start a new thread and go in through the last 3 beads and continue as you are going. Now the final 2 beads, I'm just going to quickly show you how to finish the outline and how to close this embroidered loop that we have made. Now these are the 2 that I've just added. Now I'm pushing my needle 1 bead before them so that I can go through the last 3 beads as if I was about to add another bead, but I'm going through the next one, which is the first bead that I've added as well. So I'm going through 4 beads in total. And that's how I connect this to the first bead and close the loop. That's it. Now I'm gonna finish this thread and show you how to fill in the space with the grass stitch. Right, as you can see, I've finished beading the outline of the bracelet, so now it's time to fill it up with beads. You don't need to draw any lines because we're going to fill it up in a chaotic manner. I'm going to show you the stitch, which I call the grass stitch because it reminds me of grass. You can let me know in the comments what it reminds you of, but I'm doing it green, so it's going to look like grass. Anyway, what we are going to do now is to basically put the beads, larger beads, that is size 11 and size 8 beads, put them up vertically and block them with smaller beads, that is size 15 beads. Let me show you what I mean. I put on my thread one size 11 bead and one size 15 bead. And now what I do is I only go back in the very same spot through the larger bead, like that. And now it's basically stands up and is blocked by the smaller bead. I'm going in just next to it and I'm going to take size 8 bead, and I've decided to finish the size 8s with green and size 11 with either antique bronze or this color, which is crystal gold lined. So again, you only go back through the larger bead in the very same spot that it stands on. There. Now, I'm basically going to do the same thing all along, but as I go more towards the middle or center of the bracelet, like not along the outline, but more in the middle, I'm going to add more of the larger beads, like this. I'm putting 2 green beads, and again, one size 15 bead to block it. And I'm gonna go back through the 2 size 11 beads, like this. And as I go more towards the center, I'm going to make these little towers even larger, so I'm going to add 3, and I think 3 is the most that I will be adding, because more could be just not very comfortable to wear. And I'm going back through all of the 3 large beads, like this. And what I like to do is not to stack a tower next to a tower of beads, but at some points, and I like to use size 8 beads for that, in between the taller towers beads, I'm going to add a single bead that is going to be shorter than the rest, like this. So I've added one size 8 bead and one size 15. And right next to it, I'm going to make a taller bead tower. And I'm gonna use, let's say, 3 size 8 beads, because why not? Going back through all 3 of them. And right next to it, a tower of 3 size 11 beads, just to add some texture so that there's some taller grass and some not so tall grass, like this. I like to do it so that along the outline there's 1 bead and 1 blocking bead, size 15, and the closer you get to the center, the more beads there are, so it's like 1, 2, and then 3, so that it's more 3D and a little bit rounded. And you'll see what I mean in a moment. I'll come back to you when I fill up a bit of the space, and then when I fill up everything. As you can see, I'm halfway done, and let me just repeat what I've been doing. I've been stacking beads, larger beads in the bottom, block them with size 15 beads. That's basically it. And as you may also notice, as I've said before, I started with 1 bead along the outline of the bracelet, and then I added more, 2 and 3 beads towards the center. I also added single beads in between the taller bead towers, so as to make more texture for the bracelet. Another thing you might notice is that this part, which is not filled in yet, it's a little bit more stiff, while this part is more bendy, more flexible. That's why it's going to look really nice on the wrist, and you're really going to find it easy to wrap it around it. Okay, let me just fill in the rest, and I'll come back to you so that we can finish this bracelet. Okay, I am done. But before I show you how to finish the bracelet, let me just tell you one more thing. If you find that in some spots, like in here for example, there is no beads and it's too small for an 11 size bead to fit, what you can do is just go in that spot, maybe zoom in a little bit. It's so small you probably won't be able to see it, and when there's something at the back then it won't be visible. But what you can do, if it bothers you, you can add a single 15 size bead inside, just like this, without blocking it. Just sew it on. The next step then is cutting off the excess base material. I usually do this looking from the back, because in this way I'm pretty sure I won't cut off any thread. And just to remind you, a tip that I sometimes use, if you're afraid you're going to cut your thread, you can always smear some glue right along this outline, so that even if you cut something, it will still be held together by glue. Just so you know, remember that you don't have to cut it as close as I did to the thread. You can always color the edges of the foundation with a permanent marker. I'm going to color mine with this fancy gold colored one. You can also use the same crayon that you used before, but markers are definitely quicker. Just when you finish, make sure to give it some minutes to dry so that it doesn't color your fingers as much. Okay, it's time to glue it to the backing. I'm going to be using B7000. It's kind of difficult to get it out of the bottle, but it's very strong and it's elastic, so it's gonna work nice. Okay, and now I'm gonna distribute it in these tiny little dots. Okay, I think that is enough. And now you just press firmly, and what I like to do is to shape it in the shape that I want it to be. And in this form I leave it to dry. I squeeze it a little bit on all of the sides, and that's how I leave it to dry. Or alternately, you can put it on a surface that, like on a mug that you turn over, and leave it to dry for 24 hours or so. And see you in a minute, when I'm going to show you how to finish the edges and attach the clasp. Now I'm sure you can work it out on your own, but if you missed any spots and you've just noticed that you need to glue it some more, like in here because there's no glue, then just add some more, and in this way you can distribute it more evenly. In next videos I'm going to show you how to work with other glues that Eureka Crystal Beads also carries. I wanted to show you this because it dries really nice and rubbery, and you can go through it with a needle, so that's important. See you in a minute. Okay, now the glue has dried, and I can cut off the excess backing. This part I typically do while looking from the front. If you're working with ultra suede, remember not to cut your backing at an angle, because if you cut it at an angle like this or like this, it may affect the way that the beads will align, and it may just look worse. So try to cut it as perpendicular as you can. Remember, you can always cut a little bit less and not enough, and then just trim it a little more, and it's better than to cut off too much. Right, so this is too much, and I'm going to cut a little bit more. As you can see, because I left it to dry in this shape, this is going to keep this shape and come back to it. It's going to be difficult to straighten, and it's gonna make these waves, but it's supposed to be on your wrist, so that's actually good. And if you just left it to dry straight, it would just, you know, become wavy, like here. Okay, I think that's enough. Let me just clean it up a little bit here. Now, just a disclaimer, in this video I'm not using ultra suede because I've run out of the right color. Ultra suede is actually better for this purpose. It looks similar, but it doesn't fray. It looks the same on both sides, and it's really flexible and nice to work with, so I recommend you use that, and that's what you're going to find in the link in the description. Alright, now it's time to finish our piece. I'm going to do it using size 11 beads in the shade Antique Bronze. I've already threaded my needle. I'm going to finish this in a variation of the brick stitch, and let me show you how I do it. I do it from the back to the front because I find this easier. So I go in between the layers with my needle and go out right underneath the beads that outline my design. And I start with 2 beads, and I'm putting my needle through all the layers, that is the backing and the base material, roughly 2 beads away from where I just came from. And again, I go out with the needle right underneath this row of beads. If you left some more space on your foundation between the outline and the edge of foundation, that's also okay, and I recommend just going out underneath the beads anyway. It's going to be a longer stitch lengthwise, but that's also okay. Okay, and so I've added these 2 beads. Now I go through the second bead that I just added, like here, from the outside in, like in between them, like that. Now I take 1 bead. I'm trying to look for those that are more even and those that are taller. I take 1 bead and I put my needle through all the layers again, roughly 1 bead away. It's also good if you do it like like this so that they're not too crowded, so you can bend your bracelet as you do it. And again, I go from underneath towards the direction in which it is connected with the previous bead. That's how I put my needle through it. Let me just show you again. I take another bead and I put my needle roughly one bead away, or a little bit more in fact, because this is going to be wrapping around the wrist. So I go through all the layers right beneath the outlining row of beads, and this is what it looks like, and I go up with my needle through this bead like that, and they just stand up nicely, and that's what it's going to look like. Let me just continue doing this, and I'll come back to you when I've finished. And then I will show you how to attach a clasp. I just stopped briefly and came back to you for a second to show you how to start a new thread, because as you can see I don't have much thread here, so I got to finish this one and start a new one. So what I do is I take one bead as if I was just continuing doing my brick stitch, but I do not continue to put my needle through it. Instead, I look where my thread came out and I go into that bead and one next to it, like this, and I just bury my thread in here, additionally putting a knot over there. So I just hook my needle under the thread between the beads, I make a tiny little loop, I go through that loop, pull tight, and go through several beads, maybe some more. That's it. And I cut off the excess thread. I'm gonna start the new thread by hiding the knot underneath these beads here, roughly around where this bead is, that is one before last. I try to go out like here, make sure that this is hidden, and I go again through this bead before the last, and I go through this last bead as if I was just adding it. So I'm going through all the layers underneath the beads and upwards through it like that. And now we can just continue doing the edge. That's another thing why I like doing it from the back, because that's the result. You get this very nice and neat looking backside. Okay, see you in a moment when I finish doing the brick stitch. Alright, it's almost done, we're almost there. The only thing missing is the clasp. I'm going to be attaching it to these beads at the ends, and this part I'm going to attach directly, like this, and this part I'm going to attach with these jump rings, because, well, I could attach it just like that, but you would have difficulty putting it through this loop when you wanted to close the bracelet. I've already threaded my needle, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to find a central bead, roughly central bead in my bracelet. I think that can be this one, and I'm gonna hide the knot on the end of my thread, or a molten ball at the end of the thread, if you're anything like me. And I push my needle through under a bead on one side of the central bead. And I push my needle through that bead, so this is the central bead. And I'm going to attach this part of the clasp, like from this bead to the other bead. Taking two size 11 beads in the same color as the finishing, I am taking the clasp, 2 more beads, and I am putting my needle through this bead on the other side of the central bead. But what I do to go back through all those beads again is I try to push my needle through the foundation, the base material, and the backing. And now I come back through the very same bead and through all of those beads and the hole in the clasp again. And I do the same thing on the other side. I push my needle through this bead and through all the layers, like that. Be careful so that you don't miss when your thread does this, which is go right over the clasp, right? Now I'm going to go back through all of these beads again, and I typically do this 4 times or sometimes even 5 times. The more thread, the more unlikely it is that the clasp is going to fall off, which is going to be better attached. And it won't get loose with time, so it's going to be more firm and sturdy. Okay, now I went through this, I think, 4 times, and I know that my needle simply won't fit anymore, which is good. So I just go to the other side, in between the beads that form the outline, and I go through usually 2 or 3 of them, and just make a little knot by making a loop, hooking my needle underneath the thread, making a loop, and then going through it. And I go through several more of these beads. And there, that's it. That's how you attach a clasp on one side. Now when it comes to the other side, I'm going to find the central 2 beads, which are, I think, these 2. And again, hiding the ball at the end of my thread beneath the beads in the front, I come out of one of the central beads. And now I like just starting with the jump ring and not the entire thing. So I'm taking the jump ring on my needle. I'm taking 3 size 11 beads. I go into this other central bead and again come out there, like this. Now I go back through all of the beads, and again I'm repeating this 4 or 5 times so that it's nice and firm. Now just one more thing, if your needle doesn't really want to pass through the beads, try wiggling it a little bit like that. Oh, and see, it passed. And remember, never to force it too much because you may simply shatter the bead and, well, you're going to have to do some things all over again. Okay, that was also 4 times. And then I just go to the other side between the beads in the outline. I go through like 2 or 3 of them. Make a knot. Okay, now it's time to attach the rest. Open this one ring. Add the other. I opened this one because simply I will have to reopen and close it again. Because remember to make sure that they are nice and tight there, so that no thread can come between the wire. Okay, it's time to attach the final element, the second part of the clasp. Close the ring. If you have rings that this gauge, you can also probably do it with your hands, but if it's thicker, then you might need pliers as well. Okay, let me show you how this closes. And that's what it looks like. See, that's why it's useful to have the rings, because you can like push them through and then back again. Okay, I guess that's it for today's tutorial. I hope you've enjoyed it, I hope you've learned something, I hope you like the design. If you have any questions or comments, leave them in the comment section below. And all of the materials that have been used to make this bracelet you can find at eurekacrystalbeads.com. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!